Okay, right. Good evening, everyone. My name is George Cull. Hopefully, you can see somewhere on your screens that it's got my name under the picture of me as well. If you've got that on your camera, I'm going to be your host for tonight. I think Michael Parkinson, someone has said, which might have been me, but I'm just going to be posing some of the questions, tee some of this conversation up, and let the kind of panel take you through their thoughts and perspectives in terms of the topic for tonight, which is around physical activity, around how it is something that is extremely important anyway, but given the current situation we're in with the coronavirus, with social distancing, with a lot of people more having to stay at home more, we're also going to be exploring how it can be even more vital and more important for people during this period. It's important to note a couple of kind of warnings sort of first. It's important to note that I'm going to give you a chance to ask questions and pose any questions to the panel. Some of you have emailed them through, which we factored into the main set of questions. Obviously, we won't be able to get into personal things in terms of we don't understand your personal circumstances. So if you're asking particular questions, the advice and guidance we're giving is quite generic in that sense. So it does not supersede the advice that you would get off a doctor or physician or someone like that. So very shortly, I'll bring the panel in. We'll give them an introduction and let them speak for a little bit about themselves and the background. And then we'll go on to the questions. There is a chat box that you can ask questions in that chat box. I'd prefer, if possible, if you can do that whilst we're going along. We may not answer them straight away, we may not pick up on them straight away, but it gives me a chance to kind of formulate some, group some together, and I'll jump in at the right point to kind of to ask those questions. So don't just kind of store them up for the end and send me into a mad panic of trying to field all these questions and get them asked to the panel. So just ask as you go along, but hopefully I'll pick them up as we go along. And that's all there is from me in terms of an introduction side of things. So what I'll do is I'll kind of hand over to the panel, and what I will just ask them is to introduce themselves, say a little bit about their role, and a little bit, because I know this could be quite a long answer, about how perhaps some of that has changed since the coronavirus outbreak. So if I go first of all to David from North Yorkshire Sport.
Okay, thank you, George. David Watson, I'm the Chief Executive of North Yorkshire Sport. So our role generally is to use sport as a drive for positive change. So we would normally be trying to get people more physically active. So in terms of how the role's changed, in some respects it hasn't, because that's still what we're trying to do. Practically all of our staff team are working from home, same as most everybody else is really. But we are looking at how we can do things differently. We're still trying to support clubs. Some of our programs that we would previously be running, where our coaches and instructors are phoning people and doing making contact in different ways. We've moved some of our content online, and we're looking at new ways of how we can support those most vulnerable people to be physically active. And I think we'll probably talk a little bit later around some of the early research that Sport England have done into what activity levels are currently looking like. And it's no surprise to say that those people from that you would expect to be less physically active before all this happened are probably still the same ones, because they're still suffering some of the same inequalities. So we are looking at how we can address some of those as well.
Brilliant, thank you, David. And Fiona, if I can just come to you, just to introduce yourself.
Hi, so I'm Fiona Phillips. I'm Assistant Director of Public Health at City of York Council. So being in a public health role in a local authority, the remit of our role is really to improve and protect the health of our local population. So normally my remit covers a really wide range of work, from the kind of health improvement agenda, such as physical activity, healthy weight, stop smoking support, through to some of the services that we provide for the more vulnerable in our population, such as our substance misuse services, all the way through to kind of sexual health services as well. And obviously within that, the health protection agenda normally for us is things like working with Public Health England if we have sort of small local outbreaks in our area, which might be sort of measles or mumps, that kind of thing. Obviously now the whole health protection agenda has pretty much overtaken all of our time at the moment. So obviously our number one priority is to protect health before we can start to improve it. So what was usually one of the great joys of working in public health, in that you'd be doing something different every day, for the last sort of since the end of January, every day has been COVID-19. So it's had quite an impact on us really, but you know, something that's obviously key priority.
Brilliant, thank you. And to Richard, just to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, hi there. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I'm Richard Webb. I'm the Director of Health and Adult Services for North Yorkshire County Council. So I have three main roles really. One is public health, and Fiona's talked about the roles within York, and they're similar within North Yorkshire. Secondly, adult social care, and that's not only the 2,000 people who work in social care in the County Council, it's 15,000 other people who work in care homes, home care, right across North Yorkshire. And then the third bit of the job is working really closely with the NHS. So as you can imagine from those three aspects of the role, I'm pretty immersed in COVID like everyone else at the moment. So spending most of the time covering that. And my voice is a bit hoarse from all the video conferencing. So that's the major change, I think, so far, but other people will have that as well. And a really important part of what we do is working with our colleagues in the voluntary and community sectors, North Yorkshire Sport, lots of organisations right around the county who are doing a brilliant job to support people, lots of volunteers right at this moment.
Brilliant, and thanks to all three. It should be kind of acknowledged at the start before we go any further how grateful we are for you spending your time this evening with us and kind of taking that time out to offer your opinions and thoughts on that, and kind of know how, as you say, Richard, how immersed you all are in this day to day. But we really kind of feel that there's an important voice that can be heard around the benefits of being physically active, hence why we've put this on tonight. So we're just going to move on to a couple of kind of opening questions. Some of these are scene setting, and some of you might be already aware of these, but it's kind of important for us just to make sure that we've got everyone attending the webinar in a position of understanding some of the guidelines and some of the things that are out there. So first kind of question really is around the guidelines around physical activity in terms of the Chief Medical Officer recommendations around how much physical activity an individual should be doing in a week. So can I just kind of hand over to Fiona and to David for you both just to talk a little bit about what those guidelines are in kind of headline terms?
Yeah, okay. So yeah, as a kind of headline, the guidelines are kind of divided in terms of the life course. So you might expect different people at different stages of their life to get to do different levels of activity. So in that kind of preschool age range, what you're looking at really is children being active for around 3 hours a day. And that's just kind of stuff like moving around, playing, and doing all those kind of normal things that you do with children, basically not sitting in a car seat or not sitting in a buggy, but being up and moving around. Then for the kind of 5 to 18 age range, you're looking at a sort of average of at least 60 minutes a day spread across the week in that age group. And then for adults, we usually talk about being active for at least 150 minutes in a week, or that could be 75 minutes if you're doing sort of vigorous activity. I think some of the things that changed when the guidance was updated recently was around acknowledging the importance of building strength and doing some of those weight-bearing activities at least twice a week, and particularly as well for older adults, ensuring that you're kind of building in at least twice a week some of those activities that improve balance, and that's around sort of giving some protection against falls and things as people get older. So, I mean, it sounds complicated or a lot to get your head around, but I think probably for me, the kind of catch-all with any of that guidance is doing something is better than nothing, and the more that people do, the better.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think the inclusion of weight bearing and some of the more subtle nuances of the guidance as it's been reviewed recently is quite important. I think a big thing for me is the phrase "be less sedentary." Sedentary behaviour is a risk, and the fact that at the moment we've been encouraged to do an hour a day, go out for a walk or whatever, and again we'll come on to that in a bit. I think it's thinking about what's happening in between that as well, and that we don't fall into a kind of a sedentary lifestyle, and that's as true now as it was however many weeks ago when we all started as a general public thinking about this a bit more. So I think that's a key one for me, I think, and how we build that into what we're doing.
Brill, thank you. Next one for all three, a bit more of a personal kind of question around just quite simply, what does physical activity mean to you? What's your relationship with physical activity? If I go to Richard first.
In terms of now, or just generally, or
just generally, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess I'm quite an outdoors person, so I'm not kind of very good at any of it. But I like hiking, and I like I'm really missing not being in the moors or the dales or on the coast at the moment. So yeah, going walking, running, park run, bit of cycling, stuff like that, just being out in the fresh air. So yeah, it's quite a big change at the moment. So. And very much that I've taken on board. I think some of the campaigns you've been running more generally have been about, that stuff that David was just talking about sitting less and moving more. So I certainly have been trying at the moment to stand up and do video conferences rather than be sitting down the whole time. And everything we can do, I think back to what Fiona said, we need to just try and move a bit more, don't we, if we can, within the lockdown confines, really.
Yeah, I agree. And by the way, to the panel, this isn't top trumps about who can say they do more or better or anything like that. But David, if I come to you,
those guys will beat me.
Yeah. So for me, I guess in a whatever normal means in a normal week, I kind of go to my local gym, Big Cats in Harrogate, and do various bits and pieces with them. But my day-to-day stuff probably is dog walking more than anything. So I think, again, like Richard, being able to get outside, we are quite lucky that we can still do that. So for me, that's an important bit. Interestingly enough, we just started, well, not just started, but we'd been talking quite significantly in the office kind of a month or so before this kind of kicked off, really, around how do we as an organisation be more of an exemplar around reducing sedentary behaviour. So we had planned our team meeting to be a standing meeting, and as it happened, we ended up doing it in the hall at work, all stood 2 meters apart because we didn't want to be in a room together. So, so I think just that there's the one end of the gym and the physical activity and what that feels like, and I hate every minute of it while I'm doing it, and I'm happy when it's finished, and I've really enjoyed it. But to the day-to-day stuff as well, and so I think that's what it means for me mostly.
Cool. And Fiona?
Yeah, kind of similar to what other people have said, really. Just, it's something that's always kind of been part of my life. But I suppose more recently, over the last 3 or 4 years, what it's become to me is because I happened to be in a job where I was doing a lot of driving to work and then probably spending a lot of time sitting at a desk as well. And as a result of doing that over a number of years, I actually developed a back problem, which meant, in my mind, I couldn't do as much physical activity as I wanted to, and was in chronic pain for probably about 2 years with that. And it was actually about 3 years ago, a friend talked me into doing the Mind Red January. And so I undertook to run every day in January, and actually in that month, having sort of suffered with a bad back for nearly 2 years, in a month I was pretty much cured. So having told myself, oh, I mustn't do too much run, I'm making it worse. Actually, that was what was the road to my recovery. So for me now, I am very sort of conscious that being too sedentary can have that really negative effect. So, as Richard was saying, when I found out I was going to be working from home, almost the first thing I thought of is I cannot spend every day sitting on the sofa, because I will just be back to square one with a bad back. So I, like Richard, do most of my teleconferences standing up and just try and keep moving in between them as well. So it's, for me now, it's sort of become almost like a necessary to keep me fit and mobile.
Cool. Brilliant, thank you for that. So some different kind of relationships with physical activity, but also some similarities there. And I want to move on to sort of a bit more about the current situation, the thing we all can't stop talking about that dominates the probably working day and the time where you switch off, but is kind of the impact of coronavirus. And I think the first thing to say is that, there are 4 main reasons that the government have given that an individual should be leaving their house. I know there are some sort of lesser publicised one, but from my point of view, how great is it that one of those is to get some daily physical activity? I think that's an absolutely fantastic message that has been sent out there, that is one of the reasons you are permitted to leave the house. So the question really, just for the panel, I'll start with kind of Richard, is around just sort of some of the intricacies of that, around what is considered appropriate, particularly when going outside. So we're going out for our one bit of exercise a day, what's kind of appropriate, or conversely, what's inappropriate?
Yeah, so I mean, I can go on the advice that we're giving from the county council, and also kind of stuff we've talked about, which is we've talked about going from your doorstep. So we're trying to encourage people to do exercise, whatever it is, from their doorstep. And there are 2 reasons for that. One is about, giving yourself maximum time on your feet doing whatever you're doing. But the second is a really serious one also about protecting our kind of wildlife and smaller villages and towns, because we saw before the lockdown, that weekend before the lockdown, when people just flooded to Whitby and Scarborough and to Malham Cove, and places were overwhelmed. And in terms of potential spread of the virus, that was a real problem. So I know the government's talked about, well, you can go in a car journey for 5 minutes. I mean, I think our view would be try and do stuff local. The whole way we will get through COVID-19 is by acting locally, because, whether it's looking up your neighbours or your family members, if you want to volunteer, start with your street or your village. And likewise for exercise, start on your doorstep. So what can you do from home? So for me, I take that as kind of, we're allowed about an hour exercise every day. I don't think anyone's said that, but and there's been some legal debate about what the government actually did say, but I take that as about an hour, up to an hour. I tend to cycle or run or walk for that hour. People will do whatever suits them best, really, but I'd take that as an hour every day outside. Then, for those of us who are lucky to have a garden, the stuff we can do at home, I guess, isn't there? So sometimes, my typical day will be go out early to do some exercise out in Harrogate where I live. But then, at the end of the day, I might run around the garden 20 times. I know it sounds ridiculous, or I have a secret addiction to the Joe Wicks PE lesson, I've got to confess now. Because actually, in terms of just a 20-minute burst of energy, it's really good. And if you've been dealing with some, those of us who are working on the front line, dealing with some difficult issues about talking about, people's mental health and death and dying, and, looking for PPE, actually having something that's quite explosive where you can actually have a laugh and do some exercise is quite a good thing to do. So, I think there are several ways of doing it, really.
Excellent, thank you. David, is there anything you want to kind of add on that in terms of the kind of guidelines? And
I mean, not so much in terms of the guidelines. I think the bit you said at the start around it's one of the 4 reasons why, you know, why we are allowed to leave the house. And I think the debate has changed a little bit from how do we encourage people to do physical activity, and we still have to do that, but there's an element here of actually it's one of the few things that you can do, you know, outside of your house, and that, so that narrative has changed a little bit. So I think there feels a little bit more where people are saying, well, actually I want to do something, and you know, that message around go from your doorstep, I think is absolutely the right one. But I can also see why people might challenge that a little bit, because they're saying, actually, I don't want to do the same dog walk I've done every day for the last 7 days. And so there's a balance there. I think, you know, I think we are the only country, or one of the only countries that's actually come out and stated that exercise is one of those reasons why you can leave the house. And as somebody who works in sport and physical activity, I think that's amazing, and I think we need to grasp hold of that, and we need to keep hold of that at the end of all of this, and say, do you remember, you know, why? And so I think whether it was intended to be as important a statement as it was, I think it's hugely important, and I think it's incumbent on us as a sector to really build on that message over the next few years, not just the next few weeks.
Brilliant. And Fiona, anything else you kind of want to add or build onto that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's interesting, isn't it? And I just kind of echo some of what's said. I mean, people have probably heard that saying of, you know, if physical activity were a pill, it would be the new wonder drug. And I think the decision to make physical activity one of those things that you're allowed to do just kind of gives weight to that really, that it is something that, you know, we hugely rely on to keep ourselves healthy. And then in terms of the guidance, you know, I suppose, you know, it's difficult for some people, isn't it? But I think one of the clear things that the guidance says is that, you know, you can't be meeting up with your friends to do physical activity. And, you know, for some people for whom physical activity is as much a social as rather as a health thing, you know, that's quite difficult, and people are having to kind of find that motivation to get out and do things themselves. But, you know, that is just where we are with it, and it's clearly, you know, other than people within your household, it's something that, you know, you can't see at the moment as social in a face-to-face way. Obviously there may be other ways of keeping up the social, but, you know, as it stands at the moment, that's where we are.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. I think Richard, did you want to just come back in with something else there?
Yeah, I mean, it's really just to build on some stuff that David and Fiona were both saying. I think there's something about us using this freedom for what it is, you know, responsibly. So it's great that it's one of the 4 things we can do, but we all have to share that time and space. So actually, I know some people who are on the watching tonight have been really clear about, you know, we need not to be selfish on that. We need to, you know, be responsible, keep our social distance. Otherwise, we could have a more severe lockdown. So it's really important that we're able to do this and respect everyone's right to do this. And I think the other thing is the points that David and Fiona have made. So one is that, you know, not everyone has a lot of space in their home. They might live in a flat. There might be quite a few people in the flat. So, you know, what works for one person might not work for someone else. Some people don't have garden space. So we need to think about and find new and creative ways of thinking about how everyone can exercise. The other thing I think is the point that Fiona made earlier is, you know, I know quite a few people who maybe got long-term, quite chronic pain, and things like swimming were a really good way of helping them to manage that. And that's sort of out of bounds for most people at the moment, unless you've got a private pool. You know, most of us don't have that. So it's trying to think of alternative ways, stretching, yoga, stuff online that people can do. You know, there's lots of things that we can help people with, but it needs a bit of imagination sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, guys. I was going to ask a couple of obvious questions and get all of you to kind of give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So some of these will be really kind of, I hope most people will be aware of these. But so if I wanted to go to Dalby Forest at the weekend, is that a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
Well, it's a thumbs down unless you live in Dolby Forest.
Yes, well, it's close for a start, but even if I wanted to, so if I wanted to, what about if I wanted to go on a 100-mile bike ride? If I'm training for a long distance cycle ride, is it sensible that I go on a 100-mile bike ride?
Well, it's definitely not sensible that I do. So I'm not sure.
No. No. And I love going walking in the Dales, and I want to go on a nice hike. Is that another thumbs up or thumbs down?
Only if you live in the Dales.
Yes, yeah. So I won't do any more.
Yeah. You raise a good point though, because people have been saying to me about actually it can look very different if you live in a rural area. So if you live somewhere like the Dales, there are lots of footpaths from home you can go on. But actually, if you live in one of the more kind of semi-rural villages, that can be more challenging. So talking to people who lived around the Easingwold area about actually it's more difficult if you live in areas where there are clusters of lots of little villages. So worth thinking about that as well.
Yeah, definitely. There's a couple of people put comments on around some of the things that they've seen groups doing. They're great. We'll touch on them later, because some of the questions we touch on later about some of the innovative ways people can stay active and stay connected with groups and stuff like that. So that's brilliant. I will mention them later. Thank you for those comments there. The next one I just wanted to touch on, and then we'll get into some more sort of logistical stuff of how we can stay active and things we can do to be active, is why is it even important that we are asking people to be physically active? And this is a general question of not just in coronavirus, but I think it's more of a heightened message around coronavirus. Is it just as simple as the government think it's nice for everyone to get out for a run a day, or is there more to it than that in terms of population health? And if I got Fiona first on that one.
Yeah, so I mean, so we've kind of touched on it a little bit already, but there's really good evidence, firstly, in terms of how physical activity is a great prevention against many long-term conditions, but also for people who have long-term conditions, it's a great way of sort of managing that and stopping progression of those conditions. So from a physical health point of view, it's obviously massively important, and I guess where we don't want to get to at the end of all of this is that we find that we've just stored up a load of problems and issues for further down the line that the health service has to deal with, or I guess worse, whilst we're in this situation, that we have people whose conditions are getting exacerbated by a lack of activity, and then having to go into hospital for those sort of non-COVID related things. And then also there's really good evidence around physical activity and its impact on your mental health. And as we kind of talked about, this is I suspect that there's probably not anyone who's ever lived through a scenario quite like this, and it's very anxious and worrying for a lot of people, so actually having that opportunity to do something that's good for our mental health through all of this, I think is it's important normally, but at this time it's just so important that we've got this sort of outlet and mechanism for being able to think about and do something about our mental health.
Brilliant. Richard, anything you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I'd agree with so much of that. I mean, if you think about two of the current hashtags at the moment are protect the NHS and save lives. Well, actually, think about physical activity in its broader sense. Doesn't that just do that? And Fiona's just described that. So, doing a little bit of exercise every day, trying to get to the recommended levels, but actually just doing something is really important in terms of both your own quality of life, your physical and mental health, but also that then has an impact on the NHS and all the services. So it's good for us and it's good for everyone else as a whole. And I think that point about mental health is just as important. I know that at the moment doing physical activity is even more important for my mental health in dealing with the stuff that we're having to deal with every day. So I think that's so true.
Brilliant. David, anything you want to kind of build on with that?
I mean, I think what's interesting is that perhaps not surprisingly, we're seeing from Sport England early research that the inequalities that exist in physical activity before all of this still exist, and so younger people are more likely to be physically active than older people. People who live alone are more likely to be less physically active than those people who are living with other people. And people who live in an urban area, I think perhaps probably because of some of the things that Richard described, are being less active than those who perhaps live in a rural area, notwithstanding the caveat around some of those little villages. What I think is really, really interesting is that we've got to use this opportunity now as a sector to think about how do we reach those people. And some of what we're trying to do for everybody is going to help us to reach those people who really need it. And what I mean by that is that because we've suddenly got lots of online content, because we're suddenly thinking about how do I get activity packs into people's homes so that they can be physically active. Those are things that we're providing for people because they can't go to the gym, or because they can't go out for a bike ride, or because they can't go to the swimming pool. And there are lots of people who wouldn't have done that anyway, or couldn't have done that anyway, who still can't do that now. But we're coming up with solutions because suddenly it's the whole population. And I think there's an opportunity here to think about those solutions we're coming up with now. How do we build on those, and how do we use those to as a sector, so everybody that's on this call who works or volunteers within sport and physical activities, of us thinking a bit more about how is what we would have normally done really going to have an impact on shifting the inactive people, and how is what we're doing now going to have an impact. So I think there's some real this is an opportunity, as daft as that sounds. I think we've got to grasp the learning from it, I think.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, moving on, I think to some more practical type questions now. Don't worry, none of you will be asked to demonstrate anything. But there, 3 weeks ago, a lot of parents got thrust into homeschooling, or believing they were homeschooling. And in the mad panic, Joe Wicks put his cape on and threatened to save the nation and be the nation's PE teacher. And lots of online content's been out there. We've done some ourselves at North Yorkshire Sport around virtual challenges. But without getting into a sort of hardline educational message around what parents should be doing in terms of homeschooling, what are your thoughts really in terms of that interaction between those who have homeschooling responsibility now for their children? What should they be doing in relation to physical activity? So if I can go to David for that one first.
Thanks. I think there's two things. I think there's the broader thing around we're not, or most of us are not teachers, so we're trying to we're trying to keep them engaged in their normal schoolwork, and the teachers are doing a fantastic job in terms of sending stuff for them to do. I think, we, as a parent, I've had to, kind of sort of sometimes just chill out a bit and think, actually, they can't do 6-7 hours of schoolwork a day. Or actually, some of them can get on with it, and others need a bit of help. So there's a balance between when we're trying to work as adults and our children are trying to work and do their schoolwork, there has to be some give. I think in terms of physical activity, and there will be people, and there's no right or wrong way, I think there will be people who say 9 o'clock every morning, that's PE time and or physical activity time, and that's what we're going to do. And some families and children love that structure, and I think that's great. We've had our children doing taking responsibility for organising the PE lesson one day, and another child another day, and some weeks that works and some weeks it's an absolute nightmare and they just argue at one another. So but I think as long as they're doing something and it's just variety, and what I'm really, really keen is that we don't get preachy about it. Physical activity shouldn't be it absolutely shouldn't be a chore, and it absolutely shouldn't be a punishment. It shouldn't be something that we're going, we've got to do it now, we've got to do it now. And, so I don't know, make it fun, I guess, but not a chore. There's plenty of other stuff they've got to be doing, I think.
Yeah. And are you joining in with them, did you say, David?
Yeah, as long as it's not too dancey, that's for sure. Yeah, I mean, but yeah, I think it's a real mix, and sometimes, we same as Richard, we go out, we exercise in the garden as well, and they see us doing it, and that's no different to how it would ever be, in the sense of children see adults doing something, and then that makes them think, oh, I'll do it. We're really lucky. We've got a trampoline in our garden, and our kids spend so much time on that, and so some days that's how they get their physical activity. So yeah.
And kind of to build on that, Richard and Fiona, both neither of you are in the children's services in terms of your respective local authorities, but what are the kind of messages coming out of children's services around those almost expectations around what parents should be doing?
So I mean, you're right, and I don't want to speak for colleagues there, but I suppose a couple of things. We've got a network of school hubs running across North Yorkshire at the moment over Easter for kind of critical workers, key workers, but more generally we've got schools running. I think 200 odd schools running. Really impressed by some of the work they're doing. Look at Grove Road Primary School in Harrogate. Actually, some good examples of the head teacher doing stuff with kids that's kind of exercise in the playground and stuff like that. So there are things you can do in that environment, which I think they're doing really well. But the big message for me is about everyone taking part. The whole thing is about, it's not an elite activity that someone else does. And to be honest, I was never that keen on PE at school. I thought it was rubbish, and that went with it all the stuff that you don't want to do it and all those kind of things, and fearful of it. This has got to be something that people want to do because it makes them happy and they enjoy it, and they don't have to be super brilliant at it. They just have to do it and enjoy it. So it's that taking part message as much as how good or what you do.
And Fiona, anything else to add on to there?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it is that enjoyment factor, and I can speak from my own experience of having to do a full-on job at home and having 2 kids in the house, and it is no easy task for any parent to do this. So I think if we go into that point that I think David said, if we try and preach too much about what parents must do, we have to acknowledge that everyone's in very different situations with this. So I think it is just about trying to do anything you can, making it fun, making it not like, right, this is your hour activity, you must now do this, but actually just thinking about different ways, trying to give the kids as well a bit of opportunity for them to come up with ideas, things that they might like doing, that aren't sort of necessarily badged as this is your physical activity, but just fun things that they find interesting, and as a parent, just you've got to go with it sometimes and join in and help them with it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, guys. Next one is more generally on the population around. Sport England released the StayInWorkOut hashtag and the Join the Movement campaign as their response to trying either keep the nation active or to encourage people to be physically active during this time. So very much thinking of, I was going to say the confines of our own home. I hope we all don't view them necessarily as the confines of, but if people are having to stay at home, not leave the house unless it's absolutely essential, what are the types of things that people can do in their own home? We've kind of probably touched on some of them throughout, but some of the, not necessarily list of every activity that's going, but some of the ways where people can find a way to be active in their home. So again, I've got David first on that one, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I think we'll have all seen. There's lots of online content at the moment. Things like Les Mills or Night Training Club. We talked about Joe Wicks already. There are some kind of more gentle stuff. and certainly stuff that's aimed at different age groups. There's some good NHS home workouts. We have North Yorkshire Sport ourselves. We've moved some of our school games activities to an online weekly challenge. So some of you will have seen Teddy doing his challenges. Lots of yoga, strength and conditioning. You know, I'm aware of places like Go Yoga in Harrogate that have moved, you know, pretty much everything onto Zoom and onto classes. Sport England did a radio and online pilot called 10 Today in a couple of areas of the country, and that was kind of 10 minutes of activity aimed at older people, and you just tuned into the radio for 10 minutes and did the exercises as described. Very quickly, when this kind of kicked off, Sport England have now rolled that out across the country, and it's available through the BBC Sounds app, and it's promoted through things like Radio 4 and some of those. So some really quick. There was some quick movement by individuals, organisations. Another one that we're I think signposting people to is Make Movement Your Mission, which has been run by Later Life Training, who do a lot of the coach education for people who are delivering exercise to people over the age of 65. So they run some bite-sized physical activity sessions 4 times a day for people aged over 65. And then, you know, there's the stuff we can do outside. We talked about walking, but we can still do Couch to 5K. I saw Nicola had put that there's a few groups in Leeds, and there'll be lots of others that are doing virtual Couch to 5Ks. You mentioned, George, that we can't go up to Dolby Forest. We would normally be running our Canicross, which is a 5K with your dog. And we are looking at whether we could do that as a virtual event in its absolute broadest sense. But just things to motivate people. So there's lots that we can do. The bit that we are trying to do at the moment is think about how do we support people to be physically active who are not going online, either because they can't or they don't want to. And so we're looking at working with, in the first instance, working with County Council around some activity packs for some for families, some for kind of teenagers, and some for older people, that will actually give people the wherewithal to do some physical activity in their own home without going online, because we can't assume that everything's going to be online. So, okay.
Brilliant. I'll open it up to Richard and Fiona in a second, but I'll almost tee up the sort of supplementary question to that, which has come from someone over the weekend, which was around thinking of some ideas where people can improvise around making their own equipment at home. So the types of household items they could potentially use as things like gym equipment. So I'll tee you up for that one, and we'll kind of revisit that one in a second. But I don't know, Richard and Fiona, if you wanted to add anything in terms of what David said there around types of things people can do in their own home.
Yeah, I mean, I think David's described the list really, isn't he? And funnily enough, we did have that conversation at home about what could you do at home with bags of sugar and everything else. But I suspect we're going to have a masterclass from you guys about that. So yeah, but it's stuff like that. I think also I've heard some feedback from people who live in flats that it's more difficult. So they can go outside to do some exercise, maybe go for a walk or a run. But actually, what do you do if you've got neighbours kind of below you, and kind of that's more difficult, isn't it? So we have to think of horses for courses, what's appropriate really. We're all pretty inventive. I think there's some good points raised in the chat room about younger adults actually. And I think the other thing that I'm struck by is, what's our alcohol intake going to be like after all this? So are we all drinking more, or are we just displacing where we drink and drinking the same amount? So there are a number of things we need to think about really in all this.
I can see someone in the chat box has just put yes. I don't know if they're answering yes to the question or just saying yes to the point that you're making, but we'll let them do that. I think it's one of your colleagues, Richard. But
yes.
Fiona, I don't know if there's anything you kind of wanted to add, and they're thinking more towards the supplementary question around almost stuff you can use at home that you could maybe substitute as gym equipment or activity equipment?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of in terms of, online resources there, it's almost, there is like so much stuff, it's just where do you start kind of thing. So I think people can access that if they want to, but, in terms of things that people can just do and use, I've taken to just doing things like on the bottom step, just doing step ups, just in between, if I've got 10 minutes from one phone call to the next, just to kind of be, moving a little bit, keeping active, things like bags of sugar or tins and things can always double up as weights. And then, I've, as I said, got like 2 children, one of who's loves her sport and her dance and stuff, and the other one who would not in a million years think to do an online class or something like that. So my kind of challenge with her is just making, just giving her jobs to do, sending her upstairs to fetch something for me, or just helping in with the shopping and putting it away. And so those kind of covert things that aren't saying, you must do some activity now, but I'm just conscious that if she's sitting all the time, that's really bad. So just kind of trying to just give her jobs, get her moving, get her doing anything really.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. Right, we've got a couple more questions that I think are quite big ones. I think a lot of the comments relate to these ones. And then obviously if there's any more that we need to ask, we'll ask them. But the first one is around really that really important point around the sense of community and keeping that sense of community going despite the social distancing. And I've seen people saying, should we refer to it as physical distancing, because actually we want people to be as socially connected as they always have been, just not through the physical means. So what are the types of ways that we can keep that sense of community going in this kind of current era? And what types of things have we seen? Now, I can start by, to save you answering that, I can start with a couple of the comments that have come through around a couple of the ideas. So I'll go through them and then give you a chance to kind of build on that. So Nicola from Public Health England has said about a Leeds This Girl Can group, set up a Strava Couch to 5K group so they can all go on Strava, do a similar route, share times, connect with each other, so they maintain that feeling of being part of a group, still maybe having competition, but not as in strictly about who's fastest, but who can better themselves and what have you. So that's one that was on there. Another Facebook group, again, West Yorkshire based, called Fit Together, and just keeping that group kind of feeling together and that sense of community via I'm guessing, via Facebook. So those were a couple of the ones that there. Someone else has also mentioned about contributing to a kitchen disco soundtrack. So I'm guessing that's people connecting up via one of the kind of apps or something like that, but all having the same music blasting out. If anyone wants to replace me having to dance to Frozen in my kitchen with my then you're more than welcome. You can substitute me for that. If I kind of open that up to the panel, and if I go back to Fiona for that one, around that kind of social connection.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really important because, like I said earlier, a lot of people, they did physical activity previously because it was a social activity. So it's, that is an important element. And, sometimes that is that sort of buddying because, you need, if you say to someone else you're going to do something, you kind of feel like you better see it through. So I think any of those kind of initiatives that kind of keep up that element of setting goals and kind of sharing with others what you intend to do kind of makes you more likely to kind of follow through with that activity. And I think it's really great that a lot of the kind of clubs, certainly the ones that I'm aware of around York, lots of them are doing online type either activities or chats or things like that to keep that kind of club mentality up, and that, you know, that's really important. But I think, yeah, anything, like we said, whatever's fun for you, whatever you like. So yeah, there's been some great DJ sets have been happening on various platforms that people are, you know, raving in their kitchens to, you know, whatever it is, just look for what the social aspect of that is, and, you know, keep in touch with family and friends who you're not able to see physically.
Yeah. Richard, anything you want to kind of add on to that?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, there's this weird dissonance at the moment, isn't there? A mate of mine talked about, in some ways, we've got a greater sense of community than we've had for years, and yet we're more isolated than we have been for years. It's really, really strange, isn't it? But I think all those examples, there's some great examples out there. And you know, sometimes, again, for people who perhaps aren't into social media, we're saying to people, who do you know? Who can you ring every couple of days? Who can you just have a chat with and kind of overcome the, you know, what can I do? Well, how can I help? Well, actually, everyone can do something, and it's having a chat with someone as much as it is doing exercise online, or, you know, whatever that is. There are lots of ways we can all do something, whether it's sport, physical activity, or having a conversation.
Definitely. And David?
Yeah, I think I was going to say earlier that actually the challenge isn't finding the content and what to do. The challenge probably is, in some respects, the motivation that, as Fiona mentioned earlier, that you know, a lot of sport and physical activity is about a social bit, and therefore, you know, there is a danger that we miss that. But ironically, I've seen at least 2 examples of stuff that I'm not sure would have necessarily happened before, but I really hope they carry on happening, and I'll explain what I mean. So Louise Lowe, who I know is who's on this call, I've seen a video of Louise as an instructor standing outside her front door doing an aerobics class for the street, and everybody stood in their front garden doing that same class. And another example is up at one of the caravan parks in Harrogate. There's at least a twice weekly salsa class going on, and again, it's somebody stood outside the front of essentially their front door as an instructor and putting a class on. So those are 2 phenomenal things, actually, that, you know, they are getting people physically active, they're reducing loneliness, they're reducing isolation, they're probably appealing to somebody, in some respects, to people who wouldn't have done it, who wouldn't have gone to a class normally. So again, it's what I was saying before about these are lessons for us. Some of the broader stuff, I know lots of local our district colleagues are a lot of their leisure services staff are, instead of spending the time they would normally be spending delivering classes, they're using that time to phone up the people who they know would normally be coming to their classes, and not just older people, but people in general. All of the strong and steady sessions that Public Health fund across North Yorkshire through us, all of the instructors are regularly ringing people, and, you know, are checking in on them. And I hear some of those phone calls, and some of those are really quick phone calls. Yeah, I'm fine, thanks, bye. Others are really quite long, tough phone calls for people. So I think, you know, that's important. But that is what you know, that's what people in sport and physical activity do. They care for the welfare of the people that they come into contact with, and they're just doing that in a slightly different way now. So I think, you know, I think it's things like that. I think it is things about, you know, we are lucky, you know, if this had happened, I heard 2 things. If this had happened 20 years ago without social media, it would look very different to what it looks like now. And actually, if it happens, God forbid, in 10, 20 years' time, it will look very different again, because of the way that we've progressed with technology. So yeah. Can I, George, just come in on that? There's been a couple of comments about, I guess, safeguarding and quality control of what's happening online. And I think, you know, they are really important issues. You know, any instructor will tell you that they will have, I'm sure, spoken to their insurance companies, and the message from their insurance companies is the same as it would have been previously, which is, don't do anything you're not qualified to do. You know, don't be giving advice to people that is contra indicative. but also people have to be responsible for what they do, and we have to, we're not forcing anybody to do anything in their own home, but we might be providing them with some of the wherewithal to do it. But people have to take responsibility, but also we have to encourage them to do that and make sure that we're explaining to people all of the things that we would explain to people under normal circumstances. If you feel unwell, stop, and those sorts of things. So it is important, but I think, again, if we were doing some of this now because we didn't have to, i.e. because it wasn't coronavirus, I think we'd probably get a little bit tied up on the safeguarding. We get a little bit tied up on the red tape, and we can't do this and we can't do that because what happens if X happened? I think we've been forced to forget or work around some of that now. So I think, it's not to downplay the safeguarding side of it, but we can get past that, I think.
Brilliant, thank you, David. Yeah, I was going to pick up on a couple of the comments around the safeguarding, so I'm kind of glad that's been addressed. Right, I've just got two more questions, really. And this one's really about that idea around goal setting, and I'm hearing people are starting to think about the conversation of what happens when things return to normal, and then they kind of go, actually, I'm not sure if things will ever return to normal and what was normal anyway, but starting to think of a world where the restrictions are relaxed, where people may have the chance to do things differently. It might be work conditions operate differently. How useful could it be for during this period to think about setting yourself a goal or to almost for when we come out the other end? So something you might build up to do. Kind of just want the panel's kind of thoughts on that. So if I go to Richard first.
Yeah. Wow. So it's difficult at this stage to work out how profoundly this is going to change everything, isn't it? And you hope that the good changes will last. You hope the kind of community interest. You hope actually some of the innovations we're making in public services, you hope they will carry on. But we may just go back to what we always did. I don't know. I think it's going to be a halfway house really between that, isn't it? So we need to hold on to the stuff that's good and different as we go along this way. I don't know what it says overall about how we'll interact and how we'll react differently in terms of physical activity. One of my concerns, I guess, is how we manage the easing of the lockdown when that happens, and it needs to be at the right time and the right way. None of us want to be in this kind of lockdown situation, but it needs to be done really well. Sorry, that's probably not answering the question, but it's a big question.
Yeah, no, I think I suppose it's that. I've got my brother, like you, has got a place in this year's Great North Run. Who knows if that will happen or not? And I think as each day goes past, you probably get a bit more pessimistic as to whether it will happen or not. But actually, for that as a thing to aim for is kind of that is keeping him going a little bit. And I suppose it's more that idea of a goal of when we get out of this, I'm going to do the Great North Run. Is a way to focus his mind to actually be bothered to do something on what is potentially a series of boring days. So I think that
and it can be little goals, can't it? Actually for me, I think, and for lots of people, it's keeping going, keeping as fit as you can, and let's see what happens after that. I suppose just on a pure work issue, and this will be an issue for Fiona, but it's an issue for North Yorkshire Sport as well, is, at this stage prior to this, we've been lobbying government about not cutting public health funding. Well, you'd hope after what's happened that there might be a bit of a rethink about some of the funding that goes into supporting people to stay fit and well, really. It's really important.
Definitely. David, Fiona, just anything you wanted to add on goals, and then we'll move on to kind of the last couple of questions that have come in from people.
I think if I can just jump in, I think to echo Richard's bit about, I'm really keen that we keep the good things, that the good lessons we've learned, and the innovation I've seen. I think in the 3 or 4 weeks that we've had staff working from home, the content that's come out and the work that people have been doing has been fantastic, and actually it has stuff's happened so much quicker than perhaps it might have done before, but there's no reason why it couldn't have happened before. So I think it's to keep those good things going, to keep us focused on inactive people, you know, and as I said earlier, the things that we're doing now, I think, are things that we should be doing anyway and should be doing going forward. So I think it's mainly that, really. You know, let's keep the good bits going.
Fiona, anything?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with all of that. And I think, I mean, it's a hugely personal thing, really. And I think there is something about, you know, if you're at home now thinking, God, you know, I really wish I could go for a swim right now, or I really wish I could pop down to the gym. It's kind of try and harness that and just remember that feeling, so that when, you know, we get to that point where we can go back to those facilities, you know, make sure we use them. And conversely, if you're kind of in that situation where you're doing things, you know, you're going out for a walk more in your local area, which you didn't do as much of before, just kind of making a note to yourself to actually try and continue with some of those things. So I think goals are important, and I think I mentioned it before as well. It's also sharing those goals with other people. You know, if you tell all your friends that, you know, oh, I'm going to carry on doing a half-hour walk every day, you've kind of said it then, and so you feel like you've got to do it. So, you know, it's sharing your goals with your friends and family.
Brilliant, thank you. In terms of questions or comments that have come on, there's just a couple kind of to read out. I think most of the panel have probably had a quick flick through there, but I think Paula's point around importance of physical activity and any additional future funding to encourage more physical activity. I think the bit I can say on that and jump in instead of the panel almost is that I think Sport England were pressing ahead to launch their strategy in September, done quite a bit of consultation on that. We're going to release a draft any day now, and have kind of not ripped it up and said, let's start again, but basically this has made them rethink a lot of things. So whilst that may not result in a net increase in terms of funding into physical activity, I think it has challenged some of the assumptions that are potentially made around how that's invested and how they might do things. I think, as Richard kind of said, there is a general pointer to say, you know, lobbying to say actually the importance of public health and the role that it's played in society, and maybe as people have different priorities in a post-coronavirus world, then maybe that might make a better case for that. So there is a point around that. Also, Nikki mentioned around connectivity and community, and there's an app called Mayathon that's, I think, just recently been launched, but that's about connecting up with people. So we'll share details with that on our website at North Yorkshire Sport. We've got a website that points to loads of activities and activity finders and things like that. So that's that. I think I've got all the questions there. For anyone who's on here tonight who has anything in particular, if you want to email North Yorkshire Sport on the contact details we've emailed you on, we'll happily pick that up offline or outside of that. The last thing I just wanted to do is just throw over to the panel for any kind of final messages, thoughts, summing up that you'd like to give. So if I go to David first for that one, please.
Thanks. Get the hard ones. No, I guess it's you know, there, as we said right at the start, there's a strong message from government that you know the physical activity is one of the 4 things that we can do. We collectively as the sector have to build on that. We also, as individuals, have a responsibility to carry that out and to do that in a responsible way. And you know, I go out for walks and I see some people, you know, stop and make sure that we can walk 2 meters apart, and I see other people merrily walk past 2 abreast and are completely clueless about. So you know, we've got a responsibility, because if we don't get it right, then we'll get that taken away from us, and we will all be in a much worse position. So I think that's a message that we have to give, is that yes, be physically active, but do it in the right way. And we've got to be really careful that we don't give conflicting messages out to people. So there's a responsibility and an opportunity, I think, for us all in this.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. And Fiona, any kind of last messages from you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think, you know, for some people, this is really challenging time that we're in. But I think, you know, that message that this isn't going to be like this forever. We will come through it. The more we adhere to the guidance and do the right thing, the quicker we'll be through this. And yeah, just people keep on doing what they're doing. And, you know, wow, if we got some more funding for public health, that would be amazing. That would be my silver lining to all of it.
I'm sure, definitely. And Richard, any kind of final thoughts from yourself?
Yeah, I think David and Fiona have just put it so well, really. It's that, you know, looking after each other, and part of that is about keeping to the rules, and that's about keeping your distance so that we can all, you know, go for some exercise and look after each other. So really important.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, for you guys that have been on the webinar tonight, thank you for joining. We'll put the recording of this up as soon as I can work out the technology tomorrow. We'll put it up on YouTube and share on our social channels, so it's there for you to kind of revisit at any time or share with any colleagues or friends. I've posted in the chat box, we'll send out an email as well, a link to a short 5-6 question survey, just to kind of get people's thoughts on what they liked about tonight or didn't like, or what they found useful. Hopefully lots of nice positive comments there, please, not trying to influence you. So thank you there for attending. Thank you for, hopefully in advance, for completing that. But my last and biggest thank you is to the 3 panel members who are all extremely busy, extremely kind of under pressure, with a lot of stuff going on, a lot of difficult conversations on a daily basis taking place. So really thank them for giving up their time, really thank the way that they back the messaging around physical activity and recognise the importance of it. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Richard, Fiona and David, for that. And thank you all to everyone on the call. I'm going to end any second now, but I'll leave it up for a second just so you can get the link for the feedback. Thank you all for the comments that are coming through as well. But yes, if I could kind of get everyone to clap, I would, but we can't hear you all, so it'd just look a bit awkward me doing it. But there's a virtual clap going on. Oh, you can click a clap button on your thing. Thank you, Phil, for saving me there. But no, thank you all, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciated.
Thank you, George.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.